All right, so the second article here, this is about a JAMA Neurology study, just came out, hot off the presses. Here's an article about it. It says, diabetes drugs like Ozempic or Jardiance may slash Alzheimer's risk. So this is the GLP-1s and the SGL, what are they?
SGLT2s.
Okay, so those are the two big classifications of drugs.
Yes.
And it's worth pointing out that the GLP-1s have been used for diabetes for a decade or more before they became the popular weight loss drugs.
In its earlier versions and the daily versions, yes.
Yeah,
you are correct. So that's modern day is the Ozempics, Wegovy's, all those that you hear about for weight loss.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Yes, they are indicated for and used successfully in type 2 diabetes.
And this data is said it's more than 92,000 people with type 2 diabetes. So again, it links directly back to that article about type 2 diabetes rewiring the brain like early Alzheimer's. In fact, it may become early Alzheimer's.
Yeah. So we kind of, again, have looked at that, but now this is going a little more specific and looking at these two classes of drugs. So the SGLT2s are the Jardiance and Farxiga, just regular tablets that you take, totally different mechanism. But they're lumping them together here because of the data they ended up getting, but they're lumping them together because these are the two new classes. These are the ones that, relatively speaking in medicine terms, are new. These are the ones that then, warrant the most attention in terms of side effects, long-term benefits, and downsides. And they're the most money. Yeah. So, for patients, what a lot of them are paying serious money for these. What is the benefit versus these other diabetic drugs that have been out for a long time? So related to this issue specifically, related to Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, so a little more broad. Okay. They looked at, like you said, over 90,000 patients. Okay. And they made sure that the criteria they took away were anybody with prior diagnosis of dementia. So they got down to eligible patients, and then they compared, it was basically a 50-50 split between type 2 diabetics who were on one of these two classes and type 2 diabetics who are on the older versions of, type 2 diabetic medications, metformins, glipizide, glimepiride, those.
Traditional treatments.
Yes. So what they found was that in these type 2 diabetics, the group that was on either the GLP-1 receptor agonist or the SGLT2 had significantly decreased risk of Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's related dementia compared to the group that was on the older medications.
Wow. So
it's very interesting because you assume that both groups are relatively similar in how it was controlled. Okay. So that's why this is one of those studies that's going to end with more studies are needed.
Obviously.
This is a study looking back at data. It's not a, random, double-blind study that we recommend, but this still had this. It was so large in scale that it had valuable information.
The article here I have says specifically GLP-1s were linked to a 33% lower risk of dementia, and SGLT2s were linked to a 43% lower risk, but that other diabetes medications did not move the needle at all.
Yeah. So it's really interesting about what the mechanism of these are. It's obviously these are all different mechanisms of how they're working.
Yeah.
Why these two newer ones and what they share together in terms of their mechanism, why it would be more protective to the brain. We don't know. Again, that's what we need to find out. But I think in a practical sense, what to do with this information, a lot of people have been type 2 diabetic for a long time. And they may have been on metformin and glipizide for years, and it's cheap. It's $5, $10. And now they have to inject themselves once a week. Or now they're on Jardiance and it's got this high copay. And you may say, well, why am I doing this? And I think it's just important to understand that in this case, not only have they been shown to have increased blood sugar control, but even comparing an apples to apples related to Alzheimer's and dementia, significant difference, like you mentioned, the numbers between the two groups.
Yeah.
And it was interesting too that between the two groups they didn't see a huge difference, but between the two different study groups they did, the older drugs and the newer drugs.
Yeah, I'll take a 33% lower risk of dementia. That sounds like a good thing.
Absolutely. But I think to me, yes, it's interesting, and we want to learn the mechanisms, and that's what will be found in terms of why. The more the why. But I maybe it's my perspective because I see the financial impact of these drugs and have the conversations a lot of times about, is this really worth it?
Yeah.
Metformin was doing okay. I know my buddy's on metformin. He pays $5 a month. Why am I paying $100? Why am I paying $50? And I think to see something like this, again, as you're making decisions and trying to, plan your care, I think was important to understand and really interesting.
I remember we went over an article just recently about the blood glucose affecting the brain and that its receptivity, insulin resistance, the brain becoming insulin resistant. I assume this is related to all of that, or do we have any idea if
could be
perhaps that's what's going on?
I think in this case, because that was more related to controlled and uncontrolled.
Right.
We're assuming in these two groups.
That's true. It's controlled in both.
The control, yes. So there's some protective aspect neurologically related to the two mechanisms of this class. And I think that's where the next level of research would be, is how is this happening? Because then whenever you start to look into those things, potentially you can find other uses for them, other reasons maybe why somebody would need them, especially if they're more borderline in blood sugar, et cetera.
And speaking of other uses, the GLP-1s, this being 9 years of data, I assume that again, not the pharmacist, the old formulations were not as effective at weight loss, correct?
Yes.
That wasn't why they were prescribed. They were prescribed for blood sugar control.
Yes.
And there was some weight loss, but it was not anywhere near what people are experiencing now.
And I think a critical thing to understand is that obese and overweight people have a significantly higher incidence of dementia and Alzheimer's. So even outside of blood sugar control itself, being obese, being overweight does lead to, there's many different mechanisms, but there's a higher inflammatory process going on in the body. There's other things that play purely besides blood sugar.
Right.
So we know Mounjaro and Wegovy have significant impact on weight.
Yeah.
And then also Jardiance relative to the older class. So Jardiance is not quite where, the GLP-1s are relative to weight loss, but you do get weight loss with Jardiance and Farxiga, that class. You don't see that with metformin and glipizide. I think that's a critical component of why these, maybe comparing two groups with equal blood sugar control, you see a difference because of the weight loss impact that goes on relative to inflammation and the signals to the brain.
And so it's also reasonable to guess, just to guess, but that folks using these drugs now in the higher weight loss dosages, who are also using them for their diabetes, are going to see perhaps an even better protective effect.
Could be
reasonable to guess.
Yeah, especially relative, because it ends up becoming somewhat relative to in the sense of, if 7.5 milligrams of Mounjaro gets you within weight versus 15, that would be something to research.
Yep.
Would that have any impact at all? Or is it just the weight? So yeah, I think that's critical to get out of this, that I would like to, they have the data. It would have been interesting to put it in here now. But relative to weights, relative to BMIs of these two groups, was that an impact?
It says in one spot, it says GLP-1s are known to reduce neuroinflammation, improve insulin signaling in the brain, and promote the growth of new nerve cells, neurogenesis. Similarly, SGLT2s may protect the brain by improving cerebral blood flow, reducing oxidative stress, and enhancing mitochondrial activity. So this is fascinating.
Yes, absolutely.
Really great news. I love finding out things like this, and I love seeing these connections as we discover more and more about all this stuff.
Exactly.
There's still so much we don't know. It's nice to learn a thing or two.